General Tsakani Maluleke says that her office is seeing a continuing trend of improvements in audits. Now, out of the 425 government entities that were audited, about 115 of them had clean audits. Maluleke says that these entities constitute 19% of public finances that have been used reliably and credibly. Now, the AG was briefing a joint sitting of Parliament's standing committees on the Auditor-General and Public Accounts yesterday, and that was for the year ended March 2021. However, Maluleke says that her office has not yet seen a remarkable improvement. The AG says that in 2020, she called for greater accountability and stronger controls in government entities, and also a swiftness in consequence management and the recovery of funds. National Assembly Chairperson of the Standing Committee on the Auditor-General Sakhumzi Somyo joins us now virtually to unpack some of the AG's report. Mr. Somyo, thanks for your time. Welcome to Morning Live.
Good morning, Sakina, and your viewers.
So just your overall assessment, first and foremost, of that rather detailed report from the Auditor-General.
In the first instance, I think we need to welcome the report of the Auditor-General under very difficult circumstances, knowing very well that he had to travel right through the country to commit her team to audit the financials generally as they are enjoyed coming from the national fiscus. Those who are responsible for such intake of the amounts as proclaimed by Parliament have shown some improvement in terms of the audit outcomes, something which we must appreciate and as well encourage those who are in standing committees and parliamentary committees for their work to ensure that those who are responsible for such finance accountability remain accountable to the populace. Secondly, we need to appreciate the fact that if you look into government departments, that improvement is sinking quite well. We are enjoying the fact that they are mainly sitting from the qualifications with matters of emphasis. You don't see them on the disclaimed portion of the audit outcomes, which is an improvement which we must somewhat encourage. And thirdly, if you look into how the entities have performed, that's where you would find a problematic scenario, which is worrisome because the finances which are committed from time to time by Parliament ought to enjoy some form of accountability and as well a form of ensuring that those who are responsible for such accounts, they look into the money, they follow it, they take proper decisions, and those decisions should be informed by the legal prescripts. And the result thereof, as we see it, is the increase in irregular expenditure, which is not good for the country.
An increase by 34% or to 167 billion rand. And I just had to make sure, billion rand, because that is preposterous.
Yes, indeed, that's a huge increase. But if you follow it, you look into the category of such irregular expenditure. The one portion is a historic existing irregular expenditure, which comes over years. And the second instance, you'd find out that such irregular expenditure is in the worst state is as a result of procurement decisions, which ought to be looked at by those who spend and take such decisions with a sharp eye. And thirdly, you look into the increase mainly in some of the entities, one of those, NSFAS, to more than 70 billion, which has not necessarily an increase which is driven by procurement, which is mainly on the observation of the outlook of the regulations which ought to govern that entity. And the differential, therefore, is more sound when we look into the categorization of that irregular expenditure.
And of course, that would require more unpacking, as you point out, Mr. Somyo, to get into greater detail of what exactly happened where. But the AG also noted what she called, generally speaking, incremental improvement. But 115 good audits out of 425 that were audited. Is that good enough?
Well, when you are dealing with money, you 100% in terms of the observation of good practice. If that is lacking, you would encourage those who are involved to strive even further to ensure that we reach that state. But we must as well recognize some improvements which are somewhat there, because they are of a positive signal that those controls which ought to be observed from time to time, each auditee would have made some observation of such and implement accountable practices to ensure that the national fiscus is looked into quite appropriately and there's prudent decision in as far as the expenditure is concerned.
Mr. Somyo, talking about, good governance and accounting principles, we had 34 incomplete audits. Again, we talk about this year in, year out. The Auditor-General's office has been given more teeth, as it were, to capacitate that particular office. But still, we are seeing these pictures emerging where, in certain instances, the books are just not available.
Yes, that's a very serious indictment on those who are supposed to be responsible for such entities as accounting officers and executive authorities. It's really not acceptable that at the time of the audit, such institutions would fail to table such financials, or would provide the AG with less of a quality required on such financial statements. And thirdly, that some of them would even fail to provide such financials, not only in good time, but for several years, as it has been the case with SAA, and now it's a new company, of course. It's really unacceptable. On those which are not yet as finalized appropriately, you would find out that there will be juggling on the key critical factor for their own survival, because they are on the business practice line, where they would want to ensure that their stage of such financials does not necessarily flow towards of a query on a going concern. And therefore, the Auditor-General will spend time together with them to look into the depth of such financials to ensure that there's satisfaction in both sides. But unfortunately, the financials, they say it all. And those who have been spending the money right through the year, they remain responsible for such expenditure. If there are no documents, it's their responsibility. If they fail to provide such financials, it's as well their grave responsibility, something which we should not take kindly to.
Well, which brings us back to the whole issue of accountability. And as an oversight body, when an entity, and I'm glad you used SAA as an example, although, as you say, now a newly established entity, but when you have a state-owned entity that really does not come forward with the books, that simply do not comply with the prescripts of the law around this particular matter, what do you do as the Oversight Authority? Because even now, you look at about 13 entities that receive disclaimer opinions, and most of those are repeat disclaimer opinions. So what do you do? What are you supposed to do further as an oversight body?
Well, we have seen the nature of the meeting that we've had recently between ourselves, which is a SCOAC and SCOPA. You would find out the responsibility of the Audit Oversight Committee gets into the Auditor-General and view the audits, the quality of such audits, the timing of such audits, and as well all the intricacies which relate to the process which has given rise to such audits. And SCOPA would then prioritize those institutions which have somewhat areas which ought to be looked into detail, as it has been the case in various institutions. Look into the post office, or you could look into the UIF, you could look into NSFAS, and those institutions would appear in front of such a standing committee for further accountability on inactions or failure to take a good required actions to give rise to good results. And such institutions don't fail to do so. SCOPA is one of those standing committees that from time to time would spend in-depth analysis of such outcomes. And the call is made for the accounting officers and executive authorities to account on their failures, something which we see. And recently, the pronouncement has been made by the chairperson of SCOPA to pay visits to some of the critical institutions, whether you could term it ESCOM and PRASA, to look into how they operate in that environment, so they could improve their accounting standards and be able to observe the critical element of service which is provided to the populace in the final analysis.
So, Mr. Somyo, just a final question with regard to consequence management and the capacitation of the AG's office, and also the promise to support the AG and to give that office more powers, not only to report, but to charge perpetrators. So, on that score, how many cases have been opened so far?
If you look into the currently tabled report, you'd find the elements which the AG has referred to on the materiality of instances which have been discovered in terms of the financials there. And such irregularity, as described, require the Auditor-General to perform further investigation of such actions. More than 200 of those actions from 175 auditees, which had to produce some kind of an outlook which is going to drive those auditees to do things better. 17 of those have been finalized, and if you look into that report, they relate to instances in the Defence Force which require attention, and such instances would drive a better result. And through those investigations, direct the accounting officer at that level to take certain actions. We've seen a number of departments who have taken their heads of departments into task on various things that have failed to perform, something which is a remarkable improvement in terms of accountability to ensure that those who are on the helm of such departments, they remain accountable and accountable all the time.
Well, we have to leave it there for today, but thanks for your time this morning. National Assembly Chairperson of the Standing Committee on the Auditor-General Sakhumzi Somyo, unpacking some of the AG's report that was presented in Parliament yesterday on the audit outcomes for national and provincial departments and entities for the financial year that ended in March. Let's take a quick break before we say goodbye.